So I'm Laura Collins. I'm one of the associate ministers here. And I'm delighted to be able to talk this morning. Yeah, Joel. About the 6th chapter of Brené Brown's book. So if you've been here, as Reverend Darlene said, we're in week 5 of a 7-week study series, and we're looking at this book, Braving the Wilderness, and we began by thinking about the subtitle of the book, The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone. So what is this true belonging that keeps getting referred to in this book? Brown, who is a researcher, has studied thousands of stories and looked at different research to say, what is it that gives people that sense that they have a real belonging to each other? And she writes, true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. She sees a crisis of spiritual disconnection in our nation today that I think a lot of us are feeling, and she notes that almost half of all Americans now express a sense of loneliness, even though we have the capacity to be more connected than we ever have in history. She looks at how we gather into our ideological bunkers with people who think like we do, but how that fear that drives us into those bunkers actually keeps us more alone and uncertain. She says true belonging is about breaking down the walls, abandoning our ideological bunkers, and living from our wild heart rather than our weary hurt. It's about being more curious than defensive. It's a practice that requires us to be vulnerable, to get uncomfortable, and to learn how to be present with people without sacrificing who we are. Since true belonging does require this sense of authenticity, Brown writes, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. We can't belong to each other if we don't belong first to ourselves. So Brown gives 4 practices for getting out of our bunkers and into real connection. And the first that Reverend Darlene spoke about 2 weeks ago was people are hard to hate close up, so move in. The second one we heard last week, speak truth to BS. Be civil. And this week's topic is her 3rd practice, hold hands with strangers. In the beginning of the chapter, she writes, we're in a spiritual crisis, and the key to building a true belonging practice is maintaining our belief in this inextricable human connection. That connection, the spirit that flows between us and every other human in the world, is not something that can be broken. However, our belief in the connection is constantly tested. Does this sound like anything we've heard here before? We can never be disconnected from our source, but we can think ourselves apart. I think maybe Brené's been watching Rev Darlene online. When our belief that there's something greater than us, something rooted in love and compassion, breaks, when that belief breaks, we are more likely to retreat into our bunkers, to hate from afar, to tolerate bullshit, to dehumanize others. So throughout the book, Brown repeats this mantra almost, that we are inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than us all. And as a way to grow and cultivate our belief in this inextricable connection, she suggests that we show up for collective moments of joy and pain so that we can actually bear witness to our human connection. So we do this here on Sunday mornings. We show up, we sing, we pray, and we always get that feeling that we're connected. We get that collective effervescence when we're here together. We do it when we show up after a natural disaster to help our neighbors who've been burned or blown or flooded out of their homes, or when we go to the funeral of a family friend. We even bear witness to this human connection when we show up to cheer on our favorite football team. So back in June, I flew up to New Jersey to join a friend for a U2 concert. And it was at Meadowlands Stadium, which is one of the largest stadiums in the world. We had gotten our tickets the day they went on sale in January. It was a sellout concert, and we got general admission tickets, which meant that rather than be in one of the 82,500 seats in the stadium, we would be with the other 8,000 people on the football field. Well, in order to not be at the back of the football field, we had to arrive early that morning. So we got there early in the morning, we got a number, and we held on to our number for a number of hours, and then around 1 o'clock, they started lining us up. And so we had this long line of 8,000 people snaking around the stadium. And it was really hot and sunny, but we were just having a great time. Everybody was happy. We were telling stories about other concerts we'd been to. We were sharing our sunscreen and our water. And around 5 o'clock, they finally let us into the stadium. Well, PJ, my friend, she had been to this same concert the week before in Chicago. She may be a little obsessed with the band. So she knew what to expect, and she said, here's what we're gonna do. When they open the doors to the stadium, everyone's gonna run forward toward the stage. And the stage is in the shape of this huge Joshua tree, because this was the Joshua Tree Tour. And people are gonna run to the top of the tree, but we're gonna go past them up to the right side of the trunk, and then we'll be right in front of Bono's mic. And so we did. We ran in, and she was right, and we got these amazing, I was gonna say seats, but we were standing in front of Bono's mic. So finally, after 12 hours after we had arrived at the stadium, U2 hit the stage. And that crowd of 90,000 people went wild. And from the very first word of the very first song through all of the encores, the entire crowd was singing along. And it was electric. I am lucky to have been to a lot of great concerts in my life, but I have to say, I have never experienced anything quite like this. There we were, 90,000 strangers, bumping up against each other, singing at the top of our lungs, and those of us who were down on the field, we were all standing shoulder to shoulder so we could be as close as possible, and we were just like jumping up and down to the music, and it was great. I was just buzzing for days afterwards. Show up for collective moments of joy and pain so that we can actually witness this inextricable human connection. After the concert, I stayed in New York for a few days to visit my son, who moved up there this summer. And one of the things we did was go together to the 9/11 memorial, which I had not seen before. And when I got there, it just brought this flood of memories. I had just become a pastor of a church right outside of DC before 9/11 happened. And on that morning, I was walking around the building, which was a very large, very old building, with our Buildings and Grounds Committee, and I was taking notes on all the repairs that needed to be made. And the director of our child care center ran into the hall, and she said, something's happened, there's a plane crash. And so we went into her office where she had this little TV, and we saw the second plane hit the second tower. And within minutes, we heard then that the Pentagon had been hit. And suddenly we understood that this wasn't just New York, that DC was under attack. By that time, all of the planes nationwide had already been grounded. They secured the airspace around DC. The metro stopped working. The buses shut down. They closed off all the roadways going in and out of the city. And as you can imagine, there was some confusion for several hours, but then the people who were in the city realized that the metros were not going to be running again and the roadways were not going to be open. So those who were able began the long walk home. Early in the afternoon, I was standing on the steps of my church and I saw people start to walk. Not start to walk, they were ending their walks. It was about 8 miles from Capitol Hill to my church. And They were in their business suits and their dresses and their business shoes, holding their briefcases, and everybody was absolutely silent and ashen-faced. As soon as I realized that we were in a national crisis, I cleared my calendar and I opened up the sanctuary for prayer. And we stayed open for the rest of the week. And all week, people just came in and out. And I would sit or cry or pray. People who hadn't set foot in a church in decades came by. That Sunday, our little congregation, which normally had about 80 people in attendance, had triple that number. And together that morning, we lit candles, and we prayed, and we cried. We held hands with strangers. We tried to make sense of what was going on around us. We tried to imagine how to move forward. But mostly, we just held each other in our heartbreak. Show up for collective moments of joy and pain so that we can bear witness to the inextricable human connection. At the U2 concert in June and on September 16th, 2001, nobody asked anybody else who they had voted for or how they felt about abortion or immigration rights or tax policy or what they thought about Jesus. We just held hands with each other and felt that human connection. We can show up for each other, whether it's in exuberant joy or excruciating pain. And this, Brown writes, is a critical practice for remembering that we have more in common as human beings than the ideologies that separate us. Not only do moments of collective emotion remind us of what is possible between people, she writes, but they also remind us of what is true about the human spirit. Now, I want to tell you about two other things that happened at that concert. So once we had staked out our spots in front of the stage, we were all sort of congratulating each other on getting such great spots. And somebody wondered out loud about the people who didn't join us for that 12-hour wait, who might come in at the last minute and try to elbow their way to the front of the stage. And one of the guys said, "Oh, we won't let them." And we all said, "Yeah," raised our beer glasses and our little plastic cups and cheered each other. And as it turns out, this theory got tested. About 3 songs in, I feel some jostling and hear some grumbling behind me, and I turn around to see a very large and obviously very drunk man sort of pushing his way through the crowd. And then I hear next to me one of the guys who'd been in that conversation say, "Link arms." And so just automatically, we all turned around and linked arms. Well, this made the guy even more belligerent, and he started cussing at us and trying to tear us apart. And when the people around us saw that happening, they started to chant, and they started chanting for security. Well, security shows up and takes the big bully guy out, and we all cheer and high-five each other and then go back to watching and singing along with the concert. Now, the point I want to make with this story is not that we shut this one man out, but that as a group of strangers who had bonded over the simple joy of waiting in line for a great concert, we decided to join forces to protect each other from someone who was being rude, who was breaking the unwritten community rules of common courtesy and decency. And I think this is what Brené is talking about. When we are willing to hang out with strangers and experience some of that human connection that we all have, then we naturally become more protective of each other. We join forces to take care of each other and to stop other people from doing harm. Hold hands or link arms with strangers. Thinking about this idea of holding hands with strangers reminded me of the story in the Gospels of the feeding of the 5,000, or the 4,000, depending on which version you read. Now, this miracle story is the only one that appears in all 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in fact, it appears twice in both Matthew and Mark, so it's 6 times in the Gospels. I think that the writers and editors of the Bible wanted to make sure we didn't miss it. In Mark's version of the story, his first version of the story, Jesus had been teaching in Nazareth, which was his hometown, after he'd been traveling all over the region. And he's got a reputation now. He's been teaching and preaching and healing, and he's got this huge following now. But he gets home to Nazareth and he starts to teach, and everyone in the synagogue is like, what's the deal? We know this kid. We watched him grow up. He's the carpenter's son. Why does he think he's so special? And so the scripture says that Jesus was not able to heal anyone there because of their communal disbelief. So we can have communal belief and we can have communal disbelief. After that experience, Jesus decided maybe he shouldn't leave it just to himself. And so all of these disciples that had been following him and watching him and learning from him got sent out. He sent them out 2 by 2 and told them to go preach, teach, heal, do whatever they needed to do. And they did, and they were highly successful, and they were very excited, and they came back to tell him all about what had happened. But they were also exhausted, and he's watching them tell these stories, and he says, I think you need to come away to a lonely place for a while and rest. Isn't that a nice idea? We get so caught up in our projects and taking care of other people and following our calling and thinking we've got to do it all. And Jesus says, retreat time. Let's get some rest. Which is a nice idea, but it's not what happened in the story. Because people saw the disciples getting in the boat to go away, and they started running around the lake. And I don't know how they managed this before smartphones and Twitter, but everybody knew where they were going, and by the time they got to the other side of the lake, there were throngs of people. And Jesus looked out at the crowds, and he had compassion on them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he begins to teach. And he keeps teaching. And he keeps teaching. And the disciples, who you will recall were already exhausted at the beginning of this day, which was supposed to be the beginning of their retreat time, are kind of looking at each other and tapping Jesus on the shoulder and saying, it's getting kind of late. We're sort of out in the middle of nowhere. Maybe you should send these people off to the villages so they can get something to eat. And Jesus looks at them and he says, you give them something to eat. And the disciples are like, seriously? Do we look like we have enough money to feed this whole crowd? And Jesus maybe doesn't roll his eyes, or maybe does, and says, all right, how much do you have? So they scrounge around and they say, 5 loaves and 2 fish, which I'm sure they thought he would understand to mean, not even enough to feed the 13 of us, thank you very much. And he says, great, bring me the loaves and the fish. And he looks up to heaven and he blesses it and breaks it and tears it up into pieces. And then he turns to the people and he says, I want everyone to sit down in the grass in groups of 50 to 100. And then he gives the pieces that he's divided to the disciples and he sends them out. And at the end of the story, we're told, and they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces. And those who ate were 5,000 men, besides women and children. So why do you think this story is so important that it shows up 6 times in the Gospels? For one thing, it's an amazing story of abundance. Clearly, the disciples have the mindset of lack, of not enough. And Jesus has the mindset of plenty, of more than enough. And so it is a miracle about God's unfailing provision. But what kind of miracle is it? Did those 5 loaves and 2 fish literally expand to feed a crowd of 10,000, give or take some women and children? Maybe, could be, but here's how I imagine that it happened. Jesus had everyone sit down in groups, not just with their little nuclear family or the friend that they came with, and he prayed over the food and he started to share it. And when everyone saw that he was willing to share the small amount that he had and not hoard it for his own disciples, maybe they began to pull out whatever they had brought along for the day. Maybe one had a flask of water and another had a sandwich in his pocket, and the moms had some snacks for their kids because, right, moms, you don't leave house without snacks for the kids. And as they looked around, they realized that not everyone in their group had something. And so they split their sandwiches, and they passed around the flask, and they shared what they had. To me, this doesn't make it less of a miracle. It makes it a miracle shared by everyone there, not just done by Jesus. There probably still wasn't enough to go around for the whole crowd when all the snacks were pulled out. But somehow, in the process of sharing, there was more than enough. It's a miracle of crowdsourcing. In Myrtle Fillmore's Healing Letters, and if any of you don't know, Myrtle was one of the founders of Unity, she and her husband Charles, and she writes about prosperity. She says this: when we develop our soul and express its talents and capabilities in loving service to God and humankind, our temporal needs will be supplied in bountiful measure. We are to find the wealth of capabilities and spiritual resources within us and bring them into expression. So in other words, abundance is not just, something that floats down on us while we're sitting on the couch in our PJs. It's something that is a result of us putting ourselves out there, putting our talents into service for others. And this is what I believe happened on that hillside. The abundance didn't just sort of rain down from heaven. It emerged from the love of the group whose hearts and hands had been opened to the possibility of enough. There is enough. We are enough. Hold hands with strangers. Share your food or your sunscreen or your ideas or your kindness. Remember that we are inextricably connected. And I said I was going to share 2 stories from the concert, so here's the last one. So as we're waiting in line that day out in the sun, there were all of these volunteers who just kept walking up and down the lines talking to folks. And they were asking us to sign petitions for the organization that Bono started called ONE. ONE is an advocacy organization to end extreme poverty around the world. And it works with governments to fight preventable diseases and increase clean energy and empower small farmers and combat corruption. ONE is very strictly nonpartisan, and Bono has even been really taken to task for dealing with some world leaders that people believe he should not be holding hands with. But if he believes that it will help the people of that country, he's willing to do it. And so he asked the people who come to his concerts to do the same. We were just a crowd of music lovers from across the political spectrum, but we had the opportunity to be more than that. We were given the chance to be connected to children with AIDS in Africa, to small farmers in South America, to builders of solar power in India. We were reminded that we're inextricably connected. Hold hands with strangers. 2 weeks ago, I visited Unity Village outside of Kansas City, Missouri, and the village is world headquarters for everything Unity, including Silent Unity. Silent Unity is the prayer ministry that Myrtle and Charles Fillmore started 127 years ago, and it remains in my mind sort of the heart of who Unity is. Each week here, we have our prayer chaplains who are available to hold hands with strangers and say a prayer. And we also have a prayer box that usually sits right outside the bookstore where anyone can write down a prayer and put it in the box. And during the week, our prayer chaplains and our ministry staff hold those prayers confidentially. And then we pass them along to Silent Unity where they're held for another 30 days. So I got to tour Silent Unity when I was there, and I can tell you it is an operation. They get 3,500 prayer requests a day. They come on the website, they come in the mail, they come by email, by the You Pray app, but mostly they come over the phone. People call the 1-800 number, 1-800-NOW-PRAY, which is 24 hours a day, answered 365 days a year. And every request is first responded to personally, and then taken to a chapel where it's held for 30 days. And during those 30 days, there is always someone in that chapel around the clock praying over all of those requests. I was able to join one of the prayer associates for a half-hour shift of praying in the Silent Unity cupola. And without exaggeration, I can say it was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. The loving energy in that room is palpable. Usually it takes my mind a while to slow down and stop all the monkey thoughts when I'm trying to meditate, but when I went into that room that day, I was immediately in a deep meditative state. I've been thinking about that experience a lot in the last 2 weeks. In one way, it's a solitary experience. Most often, the prayer associate is in the room by themselves. But in another way, it is one of the most connected experiences that I've ever had. Because in that room, the consciousness of our connection to each other and to the God in whom we all live and move and have our being is held around the clock. And stepping into that energy, that knowing, you can feel how connected we all are. And suddenly it's not just a nice idea anymore. It's the truth. It's the realist reality. Hold hands with strangers. We can't go to fabulous concerts every day or pray in Silent Unity's cupola every day or even come here to this amazing ceremony every day. But every day, we can choose to cultivate the consciousness of our connection. There is one power and one presence active in the universe and in my life, God the good, omnipotent. Richard, could I have a song? We live in times that challenge that belief every single day. And I believe we were born into this world for exactly these times. And so I'd like for us to take a minute to sink into that sense of connection with a song by Daniel Naiman, Get Ready, My Soul. Now, when I first heard this song, I heard the invitation into a deeper love and a sweeter kind of life, in a kind of touchy-feely, gooey way. But now I hear it in a much stronger way. We are being called to get our souls ready. We are being called into a deeper kind of love. And it will lead to a sweet kind of life, but it will be sweet because we choose to stake our claim with the connection of all humanity. It will be sweet because when we find our worth in our connection to our source, we will have a sense of true belonging that may well carry us out to brave the wilderness. But in our courage to belong to ourselves, we will give permission to every other soul to know that they also belong. So together, let's get ready. We're going to sing the first part once, and then we'll have a time of meditation, and then we'll sing some more.
Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul.
So I invite you to breathe that in and let yourself relax into your seat and feel how you're being held. Feel how gravity is keeping you in place, how your spine is keeping you in place. And know that this is the truth. You are being held. And in that place of being held, I invite you to take a moment to believe that you are inextricably connected to every other soul on earth. Just for the moment, set aside any disbelief. And as you sink into that knowing, I invite you to call to mind one person or group or neighborhood issue or national issue where you want to know that connection and trust it. Where you want to be able to see the stranger and believe that they have the same needs and wants and desires and loves that you do. So just see yourself for a moment, connecting heart to heart to that stranger. And if you want to, you might even add the gesture that Rev Darlene taught us a few weeks ago, where you put your right hand on your heart and you swipe it across your chest and you join your thumb and your ring finger, and then you push that energy out into the world. And know that you can go to this place of true connection at any time. It's always there. It's always available. And again, together, let's get our souls ready.
Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. Everything I've ever done, everything I've ever seen, everything I've lost or won, everything I've ever dreamed has brought me here to the present moment. my soul. I'm diving in, get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. Get ready, my soul.